Welcome back to the League of Women Voters of Virginia Legislative Pre-Session. We'll give everybody just a moment to get back to their places before we start. So welcome back to the afternoon portion of our legislative pre-session. Thank you all for joining us today. We've heard from some great partners, and we have some more great partners to hear from still. A reminder that we are recording. If you wish to not be recorded, please stop your video and then you will not appear in the recording. So our next speaker is Allison Riggs. She's the Interim Executive Director for Southern Coalition for Social Justice. She's also a League member. Allison, welcome.
Thanks, Deb, and thank you all for having me today. I really appreciate it, and I'm so impressed by how timely this meeting is moving along. As Deb mentioned, I work at the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, and my practice has been heavily focused on redistricting and voting rights over the years. I've done environmental justice and other work, but I wanted to spend my time with you talking about redistricting that will be happening in Virginia and nationally, and what the sort of implications are for the upcoming legislative session. I live in North Carolina, but I have worked in Virginia on cases before. I have represented the Virginia NAACP. Two topics I wanted to cover in my time with you. One was what to expect with the redistricting commission, and ways in which you all can be engaged and influencing that commission and its work that it does for statewide redistricting, and also a quick shout out for local redistricting and why it matters too. But before getting into that, I did want to talk about it's actually an issue that Deb brought to my attention, and is a problem in a number of states across the South that we work in, which is we had very different voting patterns in 2020 because of COVID-19. People were voting by mail at much higher rates than they ever had before. And you all got early voting, which is a different species of voting and gets categorized differently. When we have voting systems that are primarily you go to your precinct on election day, your vote is still secret, but for when we're doing looking at election results to determine the extent of racially polarized voting. So this is not political data for partisan purposes. This is political data to inform our understanding of how different voters are voting in different patterns, and what that means for the need to draw minority opportunity districts because there's problematic racially polarized voting. So you are in a situation where you have a statute that doesn't require that absentee ballots be presented. The statute gives the different municipalities and counties, the registrars in each of those places, the ability to sort of create this super precinct for those early votes and those absentee votes, but that's actually really problematic from the perspective of folks who want to do careful redistricting and pay attention to racially polarized voting patterns, because we can't, when you have just summed up data like that rather than linked to the precinct, it can really limit our ability to pay close attention to voting patterns by race, and ensure that we're not harming voters of color. And I think, so that's Virginia Code annotated section 24.2-712, and I'll put it in the chat box too. we'd love to be in further discussion with you all about how that statute can and should be amended in order to make sure that going into redistricting, both what the work being done by the statewide commission and the work that we all need to do on local redistricting as well, that we have the best data for it and that we're not thrown by unintended consequences of moving to a more easy to participate set of elections. That's a good thing. We are glad people were able to vote by mail. We are glad that people were able to early vote. That's a good thing. But you also have to think about then the sort of follow-up pieces that come to make sure that you have what you need out of that election data. So that is something to think about and to talk about with your legislators this session. Then next, the Commonwealth voters voted to amend Virginia's constitution to create a redistricting commission populated by citizens and appointees from the political parties in the different chambers. And we're starting to see some of those announcements come out. Because you have your state legislative elections in odd numbered years, you'll be on a little bit of a different schedule than a lot of other states with redistricting on that front. But the commission is must be comprised this year by the rules of that constitutional amendment, and there must be the first public meeting by February of next year. To be clear, though, we're not going to know a lot about what redistricting. We're going to know big picture numbers maybe by the end of this year. Technically on the books right now is a deadline for the Census Bureau to report to the president total apportionment numbers, so you would know if what Virginia's total population was. So whether you were likely to gain a congressional seat, lose a congressional seat, that's the kind of data we'll have by then. There are a lot of questions in national voting rights groups, and it's trickling down to state policy discussions about what's going to happen in the waning days of this current administration and what the new administration will do to try to improve the quality of the census data, if that's possible, in the early days of their administration. And it would have to be early. So there's a lot of unknowns. There was a census case just argued in the US Supreme Court on Tuesday. The president is still trying to exclude some populations from the total apportionment numbers, and it's December, right? And there's this deadline at the end of the year. I mostly wanted to set expectations that we will have a lot of unknowns coming up, but one, you should be advocating for people to go to the website, to sign up, to be considered as one of the citizen members of the redistricting commission. You should get to know and follow who the political appointed members are, and make sure that they're creating space for you to be heard. You'll talk to your own legislators, but the ones who are on the commission are going to have a little bit more sway. So you'll want to keep those pathways open, and you'll want to keep agitating for criteria that, in addition to the commission, criteria that are very carefully attentive to the needs of communities of color throughout Virginia. You want to see a commitment to that too, because there was a divide and some tensions in the electorate and who supported it. You'll want to be attentive to that history and making sure that protecting communities of color is something that the League is really committed to through this process and in the commission. With that, I think, Deb, I got a message that time was up, so happy to answer any questions if folks have them.
There are no questions, but Carol and Haywood did put the application for the redistricting committee in the chat box for anyone who'd like to see that or apply.
California generally gets tens of thousands of applications. Now they have a full citizens commission, but I'll be eager to see the Virginia numbers, trying to to challenge those California numbers. And that only happens if you all share that application. You know, sometimes, and we see this as women leaders, right? Like sometimes you need to ask someone to serve. They may not believe that they are qualified. And seeing someone who's part of the league, part of a community that hasn't been heard in redistricting in the past, I think, you know, asking someone you think would be good to serve or stepping up to serve yourself rather than being held back by any sort of imposter syndrome. I'd love to see you all do that.
Allison, thank you so much. Our next speaker is Lori Haas. She's the Senior Director of Advocacy for Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. Welcome, Lori.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm pleased and honored to be here with you all. I have enjoyed this event for many, many years. I know you've heard from my friend and colleague in the past, Andrew Goddard. Thank you, Andy, for all you've done. And also to the League for your support of this issue. As a way of introduction, for those that don't know me, my name is Lori Haas. I live in Richmond, Virginia, and I have been working on gun violence prevention in all its forms since shortly after the Virginia Tech tragedy in 2007. My daughter was shot and injured at that event, as was Andy's son, and together we have committed ourselves in the aftermath of that shooting to understand, you know, what porous laws Virginia had and didn't have, and you know why, and what the epidemic of gun violence looked like in the Commonwealth and across the country. I've been working for the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence and the Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence since 2009. And I just wanted to share a little bit with your group. I know on the speakers list, Mary or Deb, y'all included a link to csgv.org. That's the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. But I am also employed by the Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence. The Ed Fund is a C3. We're a public health think tank. We have a staff of 14. On our website, we have links to Virginia data and resources, and I highly encourage you to take advantage of the Ed Fund's website. There is a great deal of resources on gun suicides, domestic violence, community violence, non-fatal gun violence, and truly the epidemic of gun violence that we see across the country. Our most recent report is titled The Public Health Approach to Gun Violence Prevention. This is a great guide and resource in how we can address gun violence as the public health epidemic that it is. Much like we've seen other issues, drunk driving perhaps, and other things, we can take a public health approach to solving the problem of gun violence. The Coalition is our advocacy and messaging C4. I'm a registered lobbyist with the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence, but I work for both organizations. I want to, you know, given the demand by voters, you know, over these many years when the Virginia General Assembly did not address the scourge of gun violence across our Commonwealth, people spoke up, demanded that something be done, and in the 2020 Virginia General Assembly session, we passed well over a dozen bills. It's thanks to support from people like you who, you know, raised your voices and lifted up this issue, and we're grateful for all that the League has done over these many years. Also of note, gun homicides disproportionately, and other shootings disproportionately affect communities of color, not because of the color of their skin, but because of the systemic racism, that generations of systemic racism that has resulted in underserved citizens. It's important that we get funding on the ground for programs that can reduce gun violence, and we're tickled and delighted to share that a significant amount of funding for community-based violence interruption prevention and programs was included in the 2020-2022 budget. we understand that good policy and good legislation goes hand in hand with resources to implement on the ground kinds of programs. So we take a broad approach to reducing gun violence. For those of you who may not be aware, I have a list of all the bills that passed in 2020. I won't go over that list. People are aware, I believe, of the 7 pieces of legislation that the governor highlighted and probably familiar with those. But some of the other things we did was require safe storage of firearms and ammunition in family daycare homes. We've all heard of tragedies where a toddler or a preschooler got hold of a gun. There was one that happened in a rural community in Virginia a couple springs ago. We passed legislation to require hands-on and in-person training for persons applying for a concealed handgun permit. We passed a prohibition on trigger activators. Those are the bump stocks that were used in the Las Vegas shooting that allowed a semi-automatic firearm to become a fully automatic firearm. We also worked with the Attorney General to address some paramilitary activities and prohibiting intimidation with a firearm. We also passed this is surprising to some, I'm sure, a firearm prohibition in daycare centers and preschools, public, private, or religious during operating hours. These are just some of the additional bills that were passed in the 2020 session that will hopefully make our communities safer. Looking forward, one of the bills that is a high priority for the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence, Ed Fund, and many of our partners on the ground is what is called a DV misdemeanor bill. Under federal law, but only federal law, certain domestic violence misdemeanor convictions result in a prohibition on the possession of firearms. We do not have a state law that mirrors the federal prohibition. Hence, law enforcement are not authorized to enforce federal law, much like we see in other circumstances in other federal law. We need a state level prohibition on persons convicted of certain domestic violence misdemeanors from possessing, purchasing, or transporting a firearm. We know that a history of violence is the single biggest predictor of future violence. So a person convicted of these violent misdemeanors, often it's their second or third, even fourth, commitment of these crimes, but often they're pleaded out or they're thrown out or the victim doesn't come forward. There's a lot of reasons. So if there is a conviction, this is often a person who has committed violence numerous times. So we feel very strongly about this bill, and we hope that the League of Women Voters will support us in pushing the passage of this bill. It will be narrowly drafted. It will serve a single purpose, i.e., bring Virginia code in compliance with the federal code. That's at the top of our list for the 2021 session. Also during 2021, we're looking forward to thinking about and addressing the open carry of firearms used to intimidate citizens, elected officials, the voting process. We know that insurrectionism, i.e. using force and firearms to ignore the rules of law, is the antithesis of democracy, and we want to do something about it. Lastly, I will put in the chat, we're having an event Friday afternoon on the future of gun violence prevention under a Biden administration. So I'll put a link to the invitation to that Zoom event in the chat in a few minutes. But right now, I believe I have a few minutes for questions. Is that correct, Mary?
Yeah, Laura, this is Joan. You do. There is a question. Can we get a ban on assault weapons in 2021? What else can we do in 2021 while we continue to have the legislators who demonstrated their concern for gun violence protection?
Right now, the governor sponsored a bill in 2020 to ban assault weapons. It did not pass. The Senate Judiciary frankly, led by Senator Chap Peterson, said, no, we're not going to do this. We're going to send it to the Crime Commission to be studied. Of course, dozens of issues went to the Crime Commission. The Crime Commission did not pick up the issue of assault weapons. So that bill may or may not come back from the governor. We're not sure. What we're talking about is banning the open carry of those weapons and other weapons on public property. We feel like perhaps that's a compromise to get these weapons off our streets, but an actual ban on the to regulate those and or to own those may not see the light of day for 2021. There's been resistance in the Senate side of things. The House is has a very large appetite to doing what we consider gun safety bills, but there are some in the Senate. I'll name them out loud: Cree Deeds, Linwood Lewis, John Edwards, and Chap Peterson, who are resistant to some more of the broader and more impactful legislation that we promote. 2021 is going to be difficult because it's virtual, all of the issues that people have raised. So we are respectfully trying to limit the number of bills we're asking for. We may see bills from other legislators on ghost guns, permit to purchase, concealed carry, high capacity magazines, and others. But I think leadership will be deciding on which bills they move and which ones they don't.
Lori, thank you so much for updating us on the gun violence issues. We're so thankful for the progress that was made in the last session, and we look forward to making more progress. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Our next speaker is Connor Kish. He is the Legislative Director for Sierra Club, Virginia. Welcome, Connor.
Thank you, Deb. Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be with you, and appreciate your invitation, inviting me to share a little bit about our work for 2021 and what we're planning, and really do appreciate the opportunity to take a few minutes of your time. This is my first year working for the Sierra Club. I was previously working in several campaigns and used to be a legislative aide in the General Assembly for Delegate Betsy Carr for a number of years. So I see a lot of familiar names on the list here. So glad to be joining you all in this role and look forward to continuing to work with you for the years to come. I want to give just a brief overview of Sierra Club and our work in Virginia. Obviously, there's the Sierra Club at the national level, and then there are state chapters that execute the vision of the Sierra Club at the national level at both the state government level and the local government level. So the Sierra Club Virginia chapter is a organization that at the legislative level aims to make advancements in a number of areas, mainly focused on environmental justice, energy, clean energy, and the reduction of pollution across the Commonwealth. In 2021, our work is going to be focusing on some advancements that were made in 2020 and how we can strengthen them. In 2020 legislative session, Virginia passed the Virginia Clean Economy Act, which many of you know about. It was a landmark clean energy legislation that will take Virginia to zero carbon pollution by 2045, and does a number of other very critical things as it relates to ratepayers and the development of renewable resources. So on the heels of that work, our 2021 plan focuses on a couple of things. First, we're going to be turning in directions a little bit to look at other polluting sectors, other large polluting sectors outside of the energy production space. And what that really means and boils itself down to is the transportation sector. That is the largest producer of pollution all across the Commonwealth, next to power plants and things like that. So our plan for 2021 is to work on legislation that will reduce pollution from cars, trucks, and equipment across Virginia. And we're hoping to tie it into the work that was done on the Clean Economy Act and make several advancements in this space. Not only on the pollution reduction space, but we're also looking to modernize Virginia's transportation system in a way that's equitable. So we are going to be pushing forward a transit modernization study that's going to be carried by Delegate Dolores McQuinn, the chair of the House Transportation Committee, to look at things that are often overlooked about our transportation sector beyond pollution. So things I'm talking about are benches at bus stops, coverage and shelters at bus stops, whether the bus stop ramp is wheelchair accessible, all of those things that are part of the whole transit plan. We want to incorporate that into our work to reduce the pollution portion as well and work together to bring those issues forward in a way that is equitable and can make significant progress. We're also have a number of other issues that are working that are as the mentioned there. With all that said, we're still going to tackle a couple other issues, including energy efficient homes, what we can do to create the construction of new homes, particularly a look at environmental justice. And the Sierra Club Virginia chapter is going to be pushing forward legislation to advance and broaden the Virginia Environmental Justice Act that was passed in the 2020 session and try and put a little more teeth into that act, particularly when it comes to permitting of facilities that are often targeted to overburdened communities who are bearing the brunt of production of waste and energy far more than other communities in Virginia. And we're hoping to do that with a very strong Environmental Justice Act this year that's going to target all of those things that I mentioned, in addition to landfills and how landfills continue to target certain communities. Are adequate and accessible for all Virginians who are paying for electricity mainly through sources mainly through a monopoly source, meaning that they have no other choice but to purchase electricity from one source, i.e. Dominion or Appalachian Power. So we're going to continue down that effort. We've been working on that for a number of years, and the Sierra Club legal team at the national level is very engaged in Virginia, and we often appear before the State Corporation Commission on public utility reform efforts. We'll continue to do that in 2021. So I think I was supposed to stop 7 minutes in, so I will I will pause.
Thank you. We do have a question. Could you please talk about the Transportation Climate Initiative?
Sure. That is an initiative, a regional initiative, where a number of states are working together to collectively reduce the pollution of the transportation sector, among other things. At the moment, the Sierra Club is not pushing forward support for the Transportation Climate Initiative. There are a number of other organizations that we are a part of, including the National Climate Justice Collaborative, that wants to see additional details ironed out in the Transportation Climate Initiative when it comes to where the money will go and what the allocation looks like and what items are actually spent by states from the revenue raised from the collaborative. So the Sierra Club is not yet ready to say that we are in support of the Transportation Climate Initiative, though we do know that it's moving forward in several states.
Okay, is there any discussion of decoupling of electronic rates? I'm sorry, I said electric rates.
Okay, yeah, good, thank you. Not that I'm aware of for 2021. The Sierra Club hasn't been involved in discussion on that.
And the last one quickly, how about a ban on campaign contributions by regulated utilities?
I would expect to see that bill in 2021. We're not carrying it, but we'll be part of a coalition that supports it.
Connor, thank you so much, and would appreciate your reaching out for our participation in that coalition.
Absolutely, will do.
Thank you. Our next speaker, we have two speakers. It's Susan Burk and Denise Murden. They are the legislative directors for AAUW Virginia. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I know Denise is on, and we're both, as full-time volunteers, we've been juggling family responsibilities. So I'm at my daughter's house taking care of a nearly 3-month-old baby while she goes back to the classroom. And if you hear the dogs, it's because my son-in-law has let the hounds out. So hopefully he will hold off till I get through this. It's wonderful to be here again for this roundtable and to be with so many groups that are making good trouble. And I think what we see here is just the number of issues and organizations and people that are working so hard to make a better life for all citizens in Virginia. And that's just so gratifying. AAUW, as some may know, is a nonpartisan but political organization that advances gender equity for women and girls through research, education, and advocacy. And as we say, we've been empowering women since 1881. We don't have any members that were there then, but there are people that remember a lot further back than I do. This year, AAUW National put together a gender policy agenda, and it divided the issues that we would have as our public policy priorities into 3 categories: economic security, education, and foundational rights. And I'll kind of work my way back. From the earliest days of AAUW, our members and supporters have used lobbying, educational, and economic barriers for women. Now, AAUW, along with many other organizations, has long advocated for ratification of the ERA, and it was a terrific thrill for our members to be in Richmond for our first lobby day this past year when the Virginia General Assembly ratified the ERA and put the issue over the top. And that was a thrill to see history being made. Now, this past election season, we've been very active on getting out the vote, and expanding and protecting the right to vote is another foundational issue, as is ERA. And I want to thank in particular the League of Women Voters. I'm a member of the League of Women Voters in Fairfax for the incredible webinars they had and other training and informational sessions that helped AAUW Virginia get all the information that we needed about the voting changes that were made to increase access to the ballot. And we then in turn share that information with our branches, ask them to share it with their members and their families, so everyone would be informed of all the new deadlines, the new procedures, and the new the changes that were made to just make it easier to vote in a COVID environment. And I was really gratified to hear Julia mention that there would be an effort to try to make a number of these changes permanent, because I think it really, it made a big difference for certainly for a lot of our members. We also formally endorsed the Fair Maps Virginia campaign along with the League, and many of our members took training on texting and advocated for a yes vote. We're going to be lobbying virtually this year. We will miss being in Richmond, but we hope that this will get many more of our members statewide to participate. It's always an issue to travel to Richmond, and not everybody can do it. And our theme for this coming session will be economic security for women and families. And this is the first big issue for the gender policy agenda for AAUW. Now, we have traditionally focused on the closing the gender pay gap. That's been a central issue. But this year, we're expanding our focus to include a number of issues under the rubric of economic security, including paid sick and family leave, an increased minimum wage, protecting pregnant workers against discrimination and harassment, and other policies that contribute to economic security for women and families. And I have to say, last night, Kim Bobo from Virginia Interfaith had reached out to us, and I finally sent her an email last night indicating our interest in joining with them on the paid sick leave campaign, which we think is very, very important. And I think we can all say that our nation's experience with the pandemic has highlighted gross inequities, economic inequities, but also the disparate impacts on women and families, and the need for increased state and national legislation to take action to remediate some of these inequities. Since we've expanded our policy goals to this broader economic security agenda, this is going to be a way for us to build and join coalitions across the state with like-minded organizations, and so that we can amplify these voices with our legislators. In 2020, we were focusing our lobbying efforts on closing the gender pay gap, ensuring equal pay for equal work. And I was struck by the Virginia Housing Alliance, that presentation, which focused on the wage gap. It's really important. There is a wage gap, and it's particularly extreme for women. According to 2018 census data, and I don't have more recent information, women in Virginia earned 82% of what men earned in similar jobs. This was a slight improvement over the previous year, but we still rank 30th among US states in terms of pay equity. Now, for Black women, unfortunately, since I'm not home, I don't have all the data. It's a far lower number. For Hispanic women, it's even lower. So as we say, it's math, not myth. We were pleased to see some modest progress on the gender pay gap issue, specifically the passage of HB 622, which prohibited retaliation against employees who share salary information with coworkers, an action that could get someone fired. But other bills, including HB 416, prohibiting a prospective employer for requiring that a prospective employee provide her or his salary history as a condition of employment, while passed in the House, was deferred by the Senate until this coming year. Questions about salary history too often impact salary offers negatively, and it's not only for women, but it does impact women because their salaries tend to lag behind men's for equal work. So we are going to be working to try to expand support for this measure in the Senate, very cognizant of the shorter session and also the limitations on the number of bills to be introduced. So we're going to be focusing on the broad economic security agenda, all of the issues, looking to other organizations who have staked out efforts on these, and trying to build on the progress made last year in the coming year. And I will end there. Denise, do you have anything to add?
No, just glad to be here and hear all of these great presentations. So thank you, Susan.
Oh, and can I just add, if anybody wants any information on the gender pay gap, on any of these bills we've been following, AAUW has done incredible research work on this subject. I think they're one of the best. They're frequently referenced in the news media and others as being sort of the go-to place for research on the issue. And get in contact with Denise or I, and we can share information with you on that issue. And on the various pieces of the puzzle that need to be plugged in order to close that gender pay gap. Otherwise, the statistics show that it won't close in any of our lifetime. And we'd like to at least do it for our daughters, and I don't have any granddaughters, but if you have granddaughters. Thanks.
Thanks, Susan. We do have a Google Drive going to all the attendees. They have it already. So if you have anything, please send it to me. I'll email you, and we'll make sure it gets in there.
Yeah, thank you. As I say, if Denise and I were working under normal circumstances, we would have got something in. But there's lots of information, and if anybody is interested in sharing, working with us to get this message to our legislators, please get in touch. Again, we're trying to amplify the message here, and a lot of these groups are talking about similar kinds of issues, and I think we can find ways to work together.
Right.
I have just one thing to add, actually, and that is I did want to mention that we are working with a public policy student at the Baton School who's looking at the effect of the pandemic on, particularly on working women. So moving forward, you know, we see that as a source of additional information and research that we're going to be using that will be available to others as well.
Well, we did get one question. Does your organization have a position on UBI?
Okay, I came out.
Don't know the acronym.
Yeah, I know a lot of acronyms, and so does Denise, because we're both former feds. But that's unfamiliar. Oh, universal basic income. I don't think so. I'm not aware of that.
No, I don't think,
No.
I don't
No.
think we do either. No.
We would just like women to get paid the same as their male counterparts if they're doing the same or comparable work. The UBI is not on our radar.
Right.
Well, thank you both so much. We've appreciated your partnership and look to continuing to work together. Thank you. Next is Brad Haywood. He's the Executive Director of Justice Forward Virginia. Welcome, Brad.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. It's really an honor to be here and to have a chance to speak with you. As was noted, I am the Executive Director of Justice Forward Virginia. We work on criminal justice reform at statewide and local level in Virginia. My day job is as the Chief Public Defender for Arlington County and the City of Falls Church. And as a public defender, I gripe for a living, one might say, so I'm going to start this out with a gripe. It's very on brand for me. But I also feel like this is a legitimate gripe concerning the upcoming session. So as you all know, if you've been paying attention this year, I think the biggest news outside of the pandemic has been Black Lives Matter movement and basically police reform and criminal justice reform. We are in that era of police reform and criminal justice reform. And we have consistently as an organization been telling people that you can't solve the problems of policing without solving the problems of the criminal justice reform, the criminal justice system more generally. And the reason we say this is because there's been a fixation, I think, nationwide in Virginia on dealing with how police comport themselves when they're carrying out their business. So how gentle they are when they're putting someone into handcuffs, or how polite they are when they're encountering somebody on the street. But the name of the movement is not, and I think we're focused basically, again, like on avoiding the things that are most visible to us. Everyone saw the video of George Floyd's death, and of course that was shocking. But I think the reason people cared about it so much is precisely for that reason. It's something many people are not affected by, and they see it, and then they're consumed with that one thing, the thing that they see. But it's the things that they don't see, I think, that people don't see on a daily basis because they're not affected by them, that are really the things that need to change. The name of the movement is Black Lives Matter. It's not Black Deaths Matter. And a life is much, much more than just the breath in someone's lungs or the beat of their heart. A life is, of course, someone's liberty. It's their family, it's their relationships, it's their community. It's all those things that end the moment you're put in handcuffs and put behind a cage. We have 1 million Black Americans that are in jails or prisons. There are another 1.5 million Black Americans who are on probation or parole. We see racial disparities in the criminal justice system from the moment of arrest all the way through incarceration and the death penalty. And we believe that those disparities all come from the same place. And it's not just because police departments are running their departments or in an implicitly racist way or explicitly racist way, or because they're hiring racist people. We've got a system that is fundamentally broken and corrupt. Until we start addressing the foundations, the reason we have those disparities that we see throughout the justice system, that we're not going to get to a point where we truly are honoring Black lives, and we're truly have a sensible criminal justice system that gives people second chances and, focuses on the things that we want to be proud of as, forward-thinking, compassionate Virginians and Americans. So anyway, I add that by way of introduction because we kept trying to explain this to legislators this year, saying, when they had a special session this late summer and early fall, and kept telling them, you need to focus more broadly on criminal justice reform. And they said, wait, this is just about police reform. We're just dealing with police reform now. We'll deal with that in 2021. The special session for us as an organization and most criminal justice reform organizations did not end until November. We were working on issues until November. We're first week of November, and I think that was when Governor Northam signed the last of our bills. And first week of November, I think November 9th was when he signed the pretextual policing bill. And then, 2 weeks later, we're told that there are bill limits for 2021, and we're asking the people who are our allies to sponsor the bills that really will address the criminal justice system more fundamentally. And we're told that, they don't have room for us in their legislative calendar. So that's a problem. It's a huge problem. We've got a thoroughly broken system in Virginia that needs to be addressed. And the things that we want to get done, we're hoping, we have bill sponsors for all of our priorities. I think we're lacking them for a few. But things we really need to start talking about, we need to start talking about ending the war on drugs. And in Virginia, what we propose right now is to defelonize simple possession of Schedule I and Schedule II narcotics. You may have heard that Oregon decriminalized drugs through Measure 110 recently. We're not asking to go that far quite yet. We're asking to do something like what Oklahoma did back in 2016, which was make possession of drugs a misdemeanor. The year after they did that, there were 14,000 fewer felonies that were charged in Oklahoma. And just imagine the cost savings, and imagine the amount of lives that were not ruined because of that. We also, one of our main priorities is repealing mandatory minimums. Mandatory minimums do not work for any purpose. All they work to do is to create more false convictions and more unfair imprisonment. It doesn't mean that people can't be punished harshly for serious crime. They still can be, but it means that people like a client that I had a few years ago, charged with possession with intent to distribute narcotics, third offense. His first two offenses were in 1975 and 1990. His third offense was because he was a heroin addict, he was sharing with friends. And they charged him with a mandatory minimum that was punished by 10 years in prison for conduct that was 25 and 40 years old, respectively. That's the kind of thing that he should never face 10 years for. And we need to repeal things like that so people who are in that situation or deserving of leniency can be given leniency. We also need to reform the mass supervision. We need to end mass supervision. People talk about mass incarceration. Well, there's another supervision state, like I mentioned, 1.5 million Black Americans are on probation or parole, 4.5 million Americans overall are on probation or parole. And it's like being in a jail in your own private life. That's the way people's lives get micromanaged, and they're constantly under the threat of being reincarcerated. There's another bill that we're prioritizing about allowing evidence of mental illness to be presented in non-insanity cases. If it sounds crazy that you can't introduce any evidence of one's own mental illness about how it affected the crime you allegedly committed, it is crazy. And Virginia needs to end its status as an outlier state on that point. And then there are a number of other matters, pay parity for public defenders so they can be paid equivalent to prosecutors, and additional pretrial reform. So people hear about cash bail reform, and we've been working on that for 3 years, and there's some measures we're trying to push in that regard. So that was my presentation. I know I had 7 minutes for that. If people have questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Anyone have any questions in the chat? I don't see any. You had a very compact and informationally heavy presentation, and we appreciate it. Do you work with the ACLU? Says. And what about? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So here's what's great. Here's another thing that's wild about Virginia. Virginia, until this year, never had a criminal justice reform movement, and I'm not joking. Never did. Consistently over the past 40 years, laws have been made more harsh. We've simply increased punishments, made more crimes, put more people in prison. And there was never there was never a organization in Virginia that was solely devoted to criminal justice reform until we started Justice Forward Virginia 3.5 years ago. ACLU Virginia did some work on it back then. Legal Aid Justice Center has gotten more involved. There's a few other groups that have gotten involved here and there, but we still remain the only organization that actually focuses on this stuff. Like when this is the moment for criminal justice reform, and there aren't groups that are working on it full time. It's mind blowing. But it's and ACLU at this point, they're a strong partner of ours. We collaborate when we can, and I'm a big fan of theirs. But it's like, we need more partners like them. We need more partners we need more money. Any of y'all have money, we'd be happy to take that. But we need, people working on this on a full-time basis, because that's the only way this stuff changes, if people work on it.
Can you give us some information about the status of community oversight boards in Virginia? Yeah,
so a really great bill was passed in the special session. So, I don't mean to diminish the work that was done. There was one bill, the jail bill that was passed the special session about jury sentencing reform, which is the biggest reform in Virginia criminal justice history. But then I think probably the second or third biggest was that civilian oversight bill, which is tremendous. And it allows for localities to start civilian oversight bodies that follow all the best practices, so that are transparent, that are independent from the police department, that have both review power, investigative power, and auditing power, so they can actually do independent investigations, and then they can look more broadly at things like personnel and policies and data, look at whether the police practices of the local department are producing racial disparities. But now it's going to be on localities to implement those and to start them and fund them also. But it's a really great first start at the statewide level to authorize those oversight bodies.
Okay, we have another question. Can you talk about the current Virginia Supreme Court case on tying the hands of the Commonwealth's attorneys in prosecutions?
Sure, that's one of my favorite topics because it affects Arlington, I think, as much as anywhere else. So I personally filed a lawsuit against the judges of the Arlington County Circuit Court for a number of reasons, and their sort of interference with what we're trying to do, like due process issues, things like that related to prosecutorial discretion. But the Commonwealth Attorney here actually has one that's even more directly related to that, and her discretion to dismiss charges when she wants. She wanted to drop possession of marijuana charges, and then she was prohibited by the local judges, and then she was also required to justify every act of leniency in writing before she actually did it. A bunch of stuff that is just sort of getting in the way of prosecutors trying to be fair. It's still pending in the Supreme Court. There's been legislation. There was a bill that was passed in the special session, which now allows prosecutors to dismiss charges when they want without judicial interference. And there may be a bill in 2021 which further clarifies that prosecutors should be allowed to have their plea bargains honored. The plea bargains that are made in the interests of leniency, that judges should not get in the way of those. They never got in the way of them in the past when prosecutors were being really super harsh. And why should they not be deferred to now? Why should their discretion not hold as much weight now that they're trying to do fair, compassionate things?
Okay, we're almost out of time, but this one I think you'll like. Is there any advocacy to increase the salary of public defenders?
Yes, there is. Thanks for asking that question too. So there is a bill that is going to be proposed this year to require pay parity between public defenders and prosecutors. So prosecutors in almost every jurisdiction in Virginia, at least the large ones, receive a salary supplement from their local county, and many receive funding supplements in general to create positions for that county. And for example, in Arlington, I'll just tell you how much I make. I make $119,000 a year without a salary supplement. I get a small salary supplement from the county. There are 7 people in the Commonwealth Attorney's Office right now, because of their salary supplement, who make more than me. There are, I think, 9 who make more than my chief deputy. By and large, if you talk about the commensurate position in their office, they each make 35 to 40% more than everyone in my office. And you can imagine, like, how is that going to affect the quality of advocacy? We're not going to be able to attract as talented candidates. We're not going to be able to retain them, and the quality of our work is going to suffer unless we're really just in it because we believe in it, and we are in my office. The legislation would require localities that offer these very large salary supplements. In Arlington, by the way, they get $4 million. My office gets $160,000 a year in a salary supplement. So that's the disparity we're talking about. It would require the counties to at least pay the existing staff at the same level, or roughly the same level, as the equivalent positions in the other office. And all that money would be on, it doesn't require anybody to create, additional supplements, if they're not offering them already. But if you give one to prosecutors, you got to give it to public defenders also.
Brad, thank you very much. Very enlightening, and really appreciate your advocacy and hard work for those who perhaps don't have the advantages that many of us do. So thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Our next speaker is Kathy Burcher with the Virginia Education Association. Kathy is the Executive Director of Government Relations. Kathy,
Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for having me again. I certainly am grateful for this opportunity. I wish, like I'm sure so many of our speakers have said, I was in person. I'm going to be really good and start my timer here because I'm a former educator and sometimes I can talk too much. But again, thank you for this opportunity to give you some updates on the Virginia Education Association's priorities this session. I always like to thank this group because I know we have a whole lot of former and current educators present today, but thank you all so much for everything you gave to the children of the Commonwealth or whatever state or Commonwealth in which you work, and for your continued advocacy. Obviously, schools face a tremendous challenge in these times of pandemic, and COVID has truly been the major and largest issue public schools have been facing across the Commonwealth, certainly across the country and across the world. I like to remind folks that the General Assembly session adjourned on March 12th and schools began to shut down on March 13th. So it truly was a very quick pivot into what's happening now. The big thing I want to share, and we've been pushing this for our members, is schools are open. When you hear about schools closed, they're not. The buildings may be closed to face-to-face instruction, but our educators are literally all first-year teachers this year trying to figure out how to do the best for their students in modalities that none of them expected. And aside from our classroom folks, our administrators, our nutrition personnel, our transportation personnel, they are truly, and maintenance, and all of the folks are truly doing their very, very best to do everything they can for our students and our families, while also maintaining the educational capacity, because we really believe the end of this pandemic is in sight. While we are facing unbelievably concerning numbers and increases, we have to maintain the educational capacity and we cannot lose these jobs. And that's been the other big piece of this we have faced. And so it's been very politicized. Teachers have been politicized, public schools have been politicized, but it's an important message. I stop people from saying schools are closed. The buildings may be closed, but the modality of instruction is what is different this year. So wanted to make sure that I was saying that. And the thing that people also forget about teachers is their parents too. And so when we look at trying to figure out how to bring back to face-to-face instruction, ensuring that teachers also have access to high-quality, low-cost state childcare, particularly if they're in one division that's face-to-face and their child is in a division that's virtual, or there's a hybrid schedule that doesn't align. That's been a big part of our work since March. Obviously, and I realize I'm going to get to the state issues, but the federal implications of not having additional COVID relief for our public schools is tremendous. We are incredibly grateful to Governor Northam and the CARES dollars that have come in, not just those specifically for K-12, but also through the governor's fund that he also allotted for K-12, allowed for the protection of many of the jobs. I talked to you last year, and I think each year I've spoken to you, I talk about the crisis we face with our teacher shortage. We have seen, and no surprise to the educators here, tremendous increases in the number of retirements ahead of the school year and resignations ahead of the school year, and resignations as we face requirements that school employees who are concerned about either their own health or the health of their families being forced to go back to work. And so in situations they consider to be not safe. And so we have a real shortage here, and we already are facing that, and now we have a really concerning kind of exodus out of the profession. And so we really need those federal dollars to help put those safety protocols in place for our schools. So did want to mention that. The other thing at the federal level that we are really pushing, and it's confusing to a lot of folks, is what's going to happen with SOL testing and the standards of learning assessments that are given at the end of the year. The federal government, this current administration, and the Secretary of Education there, Betsy DeVos, I'll make no face, but trust me, there's an internal face going on. They have shown absolutely no indication of granting waivers from those tests. And so we are hopeful with a new administration and a new Secretary of Education, because I don't believe Joe Biden is going to hire Betsy DeVos. We will see some changes there. The federal government requires 17 of those tests. What we've seen in Virginia is Dr. Lane, our state superintendent, has waived through action in the General Assembly. During reconvene session, he has the ability to waive those that are not federally mandated. So those have been waived. He's also waived accreditation for this school year and next. And that's really important because those are based on those scores, those test scores. And he recognizes, as does the governor and the members of the General Assembly, that basing a school's accreditation on test scores associated with a pandemic, instruction delivered during a pandemic, is just not, doesn't make any sense. And so just wanted to make sure it was clear on those federal components, because I know our members are really concerned about those federal assessments or the assessments, and they're like, why hasn't the governor fixed that? It's a federal requirement. So for this session, we are really going to be encouraging our members of the General Assembly to tap into the rainy day funds and the reserves. Again, we believe that the end is in sight, but if this doesn't qualify as a rainy day, we are not certain what does. And recognizing with vaccines, we are likely very close to be able to having full restoration of our economy and revenue rebound. So we're looking into that. And then the two other big things are lost student enrollment. We have seen about a loss of about 40,000 students across the Commonwealth. Funding for our public schools in Virginia is tied to students. So if you lose students, you lose state funding. And so we were, through special session, able to get a hold harmless clause included. So we're good for this school year, but we want to make sure we maintain that educational capacity. If the General Assembly had not passed and the governor signed the budget that included both the hold harmless for student enrollment loss and some relief for lost sales tax revenue, we know there would have been cut positions in our schools. Every single division in the Commonwealth, almost every single one, responded to a survey from the Superintendent's Association saying cut positions is where they were going to have to go. I'm looking at my clock. So the VEA has a couple, 4 pieces of legislation we are initiating or pushing this year. One is fully funding the standards of quality. It's about a $1 billion cost each year, but the Board of Education has adopted those standards as the path of what our students really need. Jennifer McClellan patroned that bill last year. She'll be back this year with it. Delegate Aird had it in the House as well. We are looking to reduce the SOL tests to the federal minimum, which is 17, to remove the requirement that's in code that those additional 6 tests are taken. Senator Pillion is carrying that again this year for us. We are trying to get a registered nurse in every school building. And so that is always a surprise to folks that that's not a requirement. It is not a requirement, even during a pandemic. Delegate Adams, again, will pursue that legislation. And then Nancy Guy, Delegate Guy, will carry for us. We are putting in a study request to measure the impact of COVID-19 on our public schools, including the impact on student learning, on the ability to hire and retain employees, and also to evaluate our school's ability to react in case, and I hope we never do, but if we face some type of crisis like this. So those are the big pieces we will be pursuing. We do generate a daily blog at the VEA, daily reports, VEAdailyreports.com, and I can send that along, and I apologize I didn't send it yet. They always have action items in the overview of where we are that day on legislation and budget in Virginia for our teachers and our public schools. And I think I'm right at 7 minutes.
Wow, you're good. Thank you.
Well, I had a timer. I'm not that good. I have very large timers there, and I wrote notes.
Teachers. 2 quick questions. The new African American history education in Virginia, will this be statewide?
And yes, the curriculum will be available statewide. The Constitution in Virginia gives the authority to run the local schools to the local school boards. And so the implementation and decisioning around what curriculum to implement will be up to those local school boards. And so we have been involved in both pushing to ensure that that curriculum was developed, but also in the curriculum development. So we're so happy to see it. And obviously our members, we have a local association in every single school division in Virginia. And all of our local leadership has been updated about working with their board to ensure that the curriculum is offered in every school division in Virginia. But that is definitely something, ask your local school board, ask your local school division your division superintendent about, because anything you all can do to help push that curriculum would be great.
Yes, I said that's a call to league members to start attacking their board members. Not that we would ever do anything like that. How is your organization working on school equity?
Yeah, great question. A few pieces of this. Inside the standards of quality, there's an equity fund that was established and prescribed by the Board of Education. It includes increases in funding specifically for school divisions with high percentage of students that face socioeconomic challenges. They're considered at risk. At risk is defined in code solely by socioeconomic. A lot of our members think at risk includes some special education populations, but that's not the definition and code. So that's one piece of it. The other piece is that we have at the VEA over the last few years really begun to kind of step outside of what would be considered strictly a K-12 lane. And we have been working with partners. In fact, some of the presentation that we just heard, we've been working with Legal Aid Justice Center. We have been working with paid sick days. We have been working with the groups around eviction moratoriums, recognizing that all of those components impact our students' ability to be successful. And so that's a big way the VEA, and I'm really, really proud of our legislative committee that drives this work. I mean, I'm guiding them certainly, but to get behind the types of legislation that, I won't lie to you, some of our members say, why are you a part of that? But it's important because it all impacts our kids. I will tell you that as we look towards, and the VEA has a C4 arm, and so we'll be recommending candidates. We're going to be looking for a governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and members of the House of Delegates that are ready to identify truly the racially based funding formulas we have in Virginia. That's a Kathy Burcher opinion. Don't equate that to the VEA. But I have strong opinions about how our funding formula operates, and there are better ways to do it to ensure that the most dollars go to the students and the school divisions the most in need. Because again, you talk to superintendents of some of these very small school divisions. When we talk about some of these enrollment losses, you know, Fairfax, I think they're down about 25,000 students from where they thought they would be. They can kind of like move that math around because they're so large. Where you go to a Clark County, if they lose 20 students, not only does it really impact their ability to maintain their staffing, they could lose some of their K-3 class size reduction funding. So there's just so many, the budgets there are so tight that they really can't afford any of that. And so really looking at how we're sending those dollars to our school divisions and ensuring that the most dollars go to the students the most in need. But we've really been pushing that. And again, couldn't be prouder of our legislative committee. We were a part of the summer of the pressure to extend the eviction moratorium, and couldn't have been prouder of them to be a part. I don't know if you saw the full page ad, but we sponsored half of that. And again, just getting them to understand the implications outside of just what would normally be education committee bills and the impact they have on our students. And frankly, our school employees as well.
Kathy, thank you so much. And we appreciate your attention to the whole child and not just the child that's in the school building. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for all you do.
Our next speaker is V. Lamneck, who is the Executive Director of Equality Virginia. Welcome, V.
Good afternoon. Thanks so much for having me. It is wonderful to be here among so many friends and allies. My name is V. Lamneck. I use they and them pronouns, and I'm the Executive Director of Equality Virginia. If you're not familiar, Equality Virginia is a nonpartisan advocacy organization, and we're focused on achieving equality for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer Virginians and their families. You may also know that this past General Assembly session was truly a banner year for the LGBTQ community. We became the first state in the South with non-discrimination protections in employment and in housing and in public accommodations for LGBTQ people. In addition to that, we also expanded hate crime laws. We added a third gender marker to state driver's licenses. We protected transgender students in K-12 schools, and so much more. This incredible body of work just would not have been possible without the thousands and thousands of Virginians across the Commonwealth who came together, contacted their legislators, drove down to Richmond to testify, and just in general spread the word about these issues. It was truly a collective effort. And so many of you, and I know many of you on the call as well, were integral to that work and to that getting us to this point. So I just wanted to say thank you. I think many, many LGBTQ people are resting a little bit easier now, now that we have we just leaps and bounds and protections and equality for the community, truly. But with that, many people, especially LGBT people of color, still worry about safety and accessibility when it comes to a variety of just living daily life, just social services, healthcare, starting a family, literally just walking down the street. And so I say that all to say that while we have come an incredibly long way. We still have a lot of work to do. There are so many concerns, I know, on the minds of LGBTQ Virginians, and some of that is some uneasiness about the future of marriage equality in our country. We certainly understand that, and we're grateful. Actually, we saw Senator Adam Eben and Delegate Nancy Guy actually passed legislation last year that repealed the ban on marriage equality from the Virginia Code, which is an incredibly important step forward. However, as many of you know, Virginia still has an amendment, the Marshall-Newman Amendment, in the state constitution, and that prohibits marriage equality. So we're really going to be focused on this process. It's a 2-year process to remove the amendment from the state constitution, and it's going to require 2 separate general assemblies to pass a bill repealing that amendment. Then, once both sessions pass the repeal, it will then go onto the ballot to be voted on by the public. We're really confident that we will be successful in advancing marriage equality during this session, regardless of what happens at the federal level. We will certainly continue to fight for marriage equality here. In addition to that, we are also working to decriminalize HIV law or modernize HIV law here in Virginia. There are actually several provisions in the Virginia Code that target people living with HIV. All of these provisions work against public health and the public interest. And so our legislative suggestions aim to amend the current laws to incorporate the current scientific understanding of HIV, limit the scope of the law to prevent criminalization, and eliminate the extra punishment for people living with HIV who engage in consensual sexual activity. The fact of the matter is these laws are just severely outdated. They were written in the 80s when HIV was just really starting to be understood. And so we are working in coalition with some really incredible partners to move this forward. I just want to give a shout out to our friends at the Echo Virginia Coalition, and then some of our national partners, the Positive Women's Network and the Zero Project, who are helping us to move this forward. In addition, we are also looking at updating the Older Americans Act. So this is the nation's primary law for the funding and organizing and delivery of social and nutritional programs like Meals on Wheels to older adults. And this helps make it easier for older adults to age in place in their communities. We know, unfortunately, that LGBTQ older people suffer disproportionately from their non-LGBTQ peers in terms of social isolation, poverty, and access to resources. And this is especially true for Black and Latinx LGBTQ older adults who have compound discrimination concerns about the quality of their healthcare as they age. So in order to better serve LGBTQ older Virginians, we will be advocating for the Older Americans Act to be amended to include LGBTQ older adults as a population of greatest social need. And we are working in partnership with the national organization SAGE to help move this through. We've seen some movement on this in some other states, and we're feeling confident about being able to move this year. In addition, we are looking at a second parent adoption bill as well. So second parent adoption would allow a second parent to adopt the child of an existing legal parent without terminating the first parent's parental rights. And so this is a common choice for many same-sex couples, since it allows the recognition of a second parent who is already acting as a parent alongside their partner, the first parent. We think this is a great step forward. It just helps to create a very strong legal parent-child tie, even when there's no blood relationship that exists. We are working with the National Organization Family Equality, and then also Virginia family law attorney Colleen Quinn. She is also a board member on the Virginia Family Law Coalition, so we're very excited to be working with them on that as well. Feeling hopeful. And then I also wanted to share that we'll be advocating also for the ban of the LGBTQ panic defense. So the LGBTQ panic defense, if you're not familiar, is a legal strategy that asks a jury to find that a victim's sexual orientation or gender identity or gender expression is to blame for a defendant's violent reaction or murder. When a perpetrator uses the LGBTQ panic defense, they're essentially claiming that a victim's sexual orientation or gender identity not only explains, but excuses like a loss of self-control and the subsequent assault. This is incredibly troubling that this has been used. I think one of the most recognized cases that employed the LGBTQ panic defense was that of Matthew Shepard. So in 1998, Matthew Shepard was beaten to death by two men, and they attempted to use the panic defense to excuse their actions. Despite everyone's best efforts, this defense is actually still being used today. And it somehow implies that LGBTQ lives are worth less than others. So we're absolutely working to ban this defense, and we're working with the National LGBTQ Bar Association. They have been active in other states and the ban on the LGBTQ panic defense. So we're glad to be working with them, in addition to some local partners as well. So that is our kind of priority work this session. Of course, we anticipate other bills coming up during session that we will certainly be sharing and letting the community know if we're supporting or opposing that. So we will have that information on our website. We'll have our bill tracker live, and we'll always keep that up to date so that everyone can really easily follow the LGBTQ related bills that happen during session.
Thanks, V.
So
We do have a quick question. Do you have a legislator ready to submit that constitutional amendment?
Say that one more time.
You have a legislator who is going to drop that constitutional amendment.
Yes. So actually that constitutional amendment was introduced last year and was tabled. So we know that on the Senate side, it was Senator Eben and Senator Edwards. And on the House side, it's Delegate Sickles.
Okay. Thank you. And a quick question: for reforming the Older Americans Act, are you working with AARP?
Not yet. I think they would be a great partner in this.
Bea, thank you so much. Appreciate all of your advocacy. Happy for the wins and the advances that have happened in Virginia, and look forward to even more progress. So thank you so much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Our last speaker of the day is Jay Costa. He's the Executive Director for Voters' Right to Know. Welcome, Jay.
Hi there. Thank you so much for inviting me to join this event. I do have a couple of slides, so I might try to share my screen and hopefully it will work. Always a little bit of a example. Let's see, can you see that? Okay, great. So as Deb said, I'm the Executive Director of Voters' Right to Know. We're a national nonpartisan advocacy group that focuses on the transparency of political spending, and specifically focuses on trying to fix the problem of dark money in our elections. So dark money is really, kind of a mysterious sounding term, but what it really means is secret spending that happens to influence the outcome of an election, for whom you can't actually see the original source of where the money is coming from. And over the last decade, there's been over $1 billion in secret spending that has happened in our elections. It really is a problematic force. And one of the reasons that it is problematic is that it primarily pays for negative advertising. One study by a group called Maplight shows that 70% of the ads paid for by dark money groups are negative. And when you compare that with ads where a candidate has to stand up and and associate themselves with the ad, only 1% of those ads are negative. It's also really what helps special interests win. So, by passing money through shell groups and having the shell groups, which have, positive sounding names, Americans for Better, Life, Americans for a Better Economy, whatever, who wouldn't want those things? So when voters only get to see those positive sounding names, they attribute a lot more credibility to the ad than they would if they were able to see who's actually behind the ads in a lot of cases. I like to think of it as the Wizard of Oz effect. So, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. Well, if, Dorothy and her friends actually were able to know earlier on in the Wizard of Oz tale that it was just a man behind the curtain, posing as a monster or as a wizard, as a scary wizard, I guess, then perhaps they wouldn't have exposed themselves to such a dangerous journey. But because they are only ever able to see early on that, it's the wizard telling them what to do, it changes the way that they behave. And that's really, it's a analogy for what happens at the ballot box. So the solution that my organization advocates for is this idea of a right to know the true original sources of money that's spent to influence elections. And we've done a lot of polling, national level and various state level, and 81% of American voters, that's across the ideological spectrum, agree that we should have this right. In 2018, we were part of a effort to pass an amendment in North Dakota. It was passed through the ballot, and it established a right to know the true original source of campaign spending above $200. So that's pretty monumental step forward. And we've built on that in other states, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But first, just to kind of drill in on this idea of what I mean by true original source. Again, it's kind of like, this idea of a Russian nesting doll where, you have, one donor that gives to another donor that gives to another group that then passes that money on. And then finally it's spent in the context of an election to influence the way voters vote. And what we want to do is for the voters to be able to see not just the group that's spending it, but the original source of the money that is being used to promote a campaign ad. So in 2020, we helped to move forward a measure in Arizona that would have we had gathered 300,000 signatures when COVID hit, so it unfortunately didn't make it, but it was subsequently passed as a city level charter amendments in Tempe and Phoenix with overwhelming support. And basically what this did was require original source disclosure, and it put a threshold on the amount of money that you have to spend in order for this disclosure to kick in. So in Arizona, it's $10,000. Once you spend $10,000 to influence an election, then you have to report your major original source contributors of more than $5,000. And in Alaska, they actually went a little bit lower, any donors over $2,000, and that measure was passed in November. So just to kind of review, so it's the right to know the true original sources. You want to put state appropriate thresholds into place. You want this information to be available online, ideally, and also on the advertisements themselves, so that when voters are seeing an ad, they know who's actually paying for it. And then, apply this to all types of media, including digital ads. And finally, you need to give authority to some sort of body, ideally an independent agency that can enforce these transparency requirements. That was a lot, I know, but trying to kind of squeeze it all into my 7 minutes. So if you'd be interested in learning more, I'd be happy to talk with anybody at any point. This is my email address. And again, thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to answer any questions with any time that remains.
Thank you. We do have a question. Do you think right to know approach is more realistic than removing money from politics?
Yes, I do. I think, you know, there are constitutional obstacles to removing money from politics. You know, the Supreme Court has really made it possible, it has really protected political spending and political contributions as a form of speech. You know, it's possible that someday they could reverse that, or that, you know, a constitutional amendment at the federal level could be passed. But I think that's a pretty steep hill to climb. Certainly not going to happen in the next couple of years. And meanwhile, we do have this big problem of secret money. So I think this is a popular and pragmatic interim step, I think, to making the problem better.
How do you avoid the outing of donors or members who might be put at risk or danger by association, let's say Planned Parenthood?
Yep. Well, so two ways. First of all, again, to emphasize that you know, these thresholds are important, and it's always a state-specific conversation. You know, what they should be put at. We don't want to structure this policy in a way that requires disclosure of small dollar donors. What we really want to be capturing is, you know, large contributions. So that's one thing. The second is actually in the Arizona amendment that I talked about, and I'm happy to share the text of that if it's of interest. There is actually a provision that was put in there to say that donors who have you know, a reasonable and compelling argument for why they would be at risk by being disclosed can make that case to the agency that oversees the enforcement, and basically be, you know, have an exception made. That being said, I think it has to be a pretty compelling case. You know, it was, I believe, Scalia who said, you know, standing up in public to, you know, speak in the public forum requires courage. And, you know, I think that there is a balance to be struck between, you know, protecting people's privacy, but also protecting the integrity of our elections. And, you know, it's our view that when you spend a lot of money to influence the way voters vote, they deserve to know who's speaking.
Okay, and the last question is, what is the maximum amount of money a donor can give?
So at the federal level, the maximum is, I believe it's around $2,600 directly to candidates. And really the realm that we're talking about generally is in the form of independent expenditures, which is, someone's saying 2,800. Thank you for correcting me on that. So we're really talking about independent expenditures, which, because of Citizens United and other federal cases, have been deemed to not be able to be limited. Now, I also know in Virginia, it's the case that there are not contribution limits at the state level either. So I think that it's actually an interesting case to think about this kind of transparency in Virginia, because since there are unlimited contributions to candidates, you know, this type of transparency might actually be of even greater urgency than in states where it's only an independent expenditure problem.
Yep.
Well, Jay, thank you so much. Great to see you again and hear about financing of elections and where our money goes and where we don't know where it's coming from. So thank you. This concludes our legislative pre-session. We appreciate all of you who were able to join us today. I'd like to thank especially Mary Crutchfield, Joan Port, Krista Jones, Julia Tanner, Janet Boyd, and Doris Bay. like to remind everyone that our WLRTs, those are our Women's Legislative Roundtables, will begin January 13th with the first day of the next General Assembly session. And remind everyone that if you're interested in joining one of our issue groups, please contact Joan Port at firstvp@lwv-va.org. Thank you and have a great day.